This Fed Gov Today program is sponsored by the National Defense Industrial Association. On this edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose, Force Design 2028 launches at the Coast Guard. A summer of acquisition deadlines ahead for the Department of Defense and an audit coming for auditors across the federal government. Welcome to Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. The Coast Guard says 4 campaigns will comprise its Force Design 2028 effort. The service lists those campaigns as people, organization, contracting and acquisition, and technology. Captain Jonathan Carter, U.S. Coast Guard, is director of the Force Design Implementation Team. Captain, welcome. It's great to have you on the program. How did you and your colleagues determine that these were the 4 campaigns on which you needed to drive Force Design?
Well, they encompass everything that we do in the Coast Guard, Francis, and thank you for this opportunity to be able to discuss it. It's an exciting time in our Coast Guard, and the Commandant says we're operating by a binary star, which is Force Design and reconciliation. And those 2 things have now come together to really transform our Coast Guard. One of the largest transformations in our service since World War II. And when you think about what we do, people, first and foremost, where the strength of what we do is in the willingness of our people to put themselves in harm's way. We just saw that this weekend. Contracting and acquisitions. We need to modernize our fleet. We are still operating ships that are 50 years old. Even our newer ships have parts availability issues that keep us tied up to the piers more than we should. And then technology. All of our future concept of operations are going to require technology, and that's a mark we haven't met yet. So the Secretary, the President, and our Commandant have challenged us to do better, and that's what Force Design is going to do.
You've hit on 3 of the 4, and we'll talk about each of those in the time that we have. The other item is organization, and it strikes me that one of the most important pieces of that I read about that fits under that umbrella is a Secretary of the Coast Guard, which the service has never had before.
But we're excited about it, and it's something we've thought about for a long time, and we really mirrored what the Secretary of the Army does, what the Secretary of the Navy does. But I was at DHS in its infancy back in 2003, and it was a big job then, and it's a bigger job now. And so for the Coast Guard to have a senior civilian that is able to integrate across the government, integrate and communicate with industry to be able to help us acquire the capabilities that we need is going to be a huge success in what we're trying to accomplish with Force Design.
You mentioned the emulation of the Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Navy, Air Force, and so on. Rear Admiral Dash was on the program, the service's CIO, not too long ago, and talking about his IT modernization effort that will be modeled after what the Navy has done. What makes that a good fit for you to look at what other services have done rather than trying to create it all from scratch?
Well, because when we look at technology, when we look at remote and autonomous systems, those are complex capabilities to bring to our workforce. And so we're similar to other armed forces with that respect. We are creating program executive offices, and that's modeled after the Navy. Admiral Dash will lead one of those. And so the Commandant says if the lifetime sustainment personnel were mirrored up with the acquisitions personnel, the fleet wouldn't look like it does today. It would be more affordable, more capable, be underway more often, and so that's what we're moving to.
How do you integrate the operators into the operations and the delivery on Force Design closer to get the results that you just described?
That's an important question, and I appreciate you asking it because I consider myself an operator. I don't like to think of myself as a beltway guy, but through mission managers, which are also very similar, integrating with the PEOs, we cannot lose that advocacy for our tactical edge operators. And what excites me most about Force Design is even though, take for example, organization, it's a lot of higher level change, it's producing mission-oriented results. Everything that we do under Force Design will be tailored towards mission outcomes and making the jobs of our operators safer and more efficient.
You mentioned people first, and one of the elements of this is more people.
Correct.
What are you going to do to attract those people and to keep the ones that you want to keep in the Guard?
So the Secretary has given us a monumental number to increase our Coast Guard by 15,000 people. people. I might argue that we need more. It's less about the specific number of people and more about readiness and resiliency. When I'm CO of a cutter and I have a person who shows up who isn't trained because we don't have a training quota, and when they finally do get a training quota, I don't get a person to replace them, that's not readiness. When that individual doesn't have time to spend time with their families before reporting between units, that's not building resiliency across our workforce. So you do that by increasing the number of recruiters, which we're already doing, increasing the number of recruiting stations, and you change the math. You know, how do you incentivize the right places in our workforce to stay longer? The Coast Guard has always done a pretty good job of that, but that's something we're going to have to take a look at moving into the future.
And you speak from experience in that respect because your last post was a ship commander.
I was a ship commander, and before that I was the chief of Coast Guard enlisted personnel. So I saw firsthand the damage that vacancies can do to readiness and resiliency across the service. And that's why sometimes I look at that 15,000 number and go, is that enough? But it will be a challenge for us to get to that, but it's a challenge that we're willing to accept.
How does your experience in the post before this one inform the way that you approach each of these 4 campaigns?
Yeah, no, great question, and operators live at my heart. And I think the Commandant has challenged us to ensure that everything that we do under force design is tied to an operational outcome. So we do have strategic imperatives, key enablers under the force design execution plan, but each of those will be tied to very specific outcomes where we want to see change, whether it's controlling, securing, and defending the border, maintaining the flow of maritime commerce, or our ability to respond to contingencies. When the country has a bad day, you never know who they're going to call. And we just saw that this weekend with the floods down in Texas. Who would have thought they would have called on the Coast Guard? But they did, and we were able to respond. In the future, whenever contingencies with foreign countries come up, you know, we need to be ready to answer that call, and that's what force design will do.
And Admiral Dash is not the only Coast Guard personnel that's talked about integration with the other services and
Correct.
using models with the other services. That's become a very important part of the Coast Guard's mission, is not just integration with the other sea services in the United States, but integration with Coast Guards around the world and sea services.
We are very proud to be a part of America's armed forces. And the Secretary has challenged us to be, you know, the greatest, so particularly when it comes to the development and rapid employment of advanced technologies. So being a member of the Joint Force is something we take pride in and something we want to keep, and that includes the interagency writ large whenever we are responding to contingencies.
And Captain Carter, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
You can read more about Force Design 2028 and find links to the Guard's plan on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, a summer of acquisition deadlines ahead for DoD. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. What is the most important thing that you think people like Austin will see moving forward that they should prepare for today?
The appetite for more agentic AI, for more generative AI use cases. There's a lot of appetite to move into that space, and we don't want to inhibit innovation, and we don't want to inhibit progress. And at the same time, there's going to be a tremendous amount of rework if you do not have your semantic layer pulled together first.
NIST has a National Cyber Center of Excellence around post-quantum cryptography, and we're proud to be one of the consortium collaborators, along with many other very capable companies and technologies in the space. They're working to establish standards around discovery and inventory workflows, as well as the great work that they've already done in establishing new standards towards those quantum-resistant algorithms, right, and helping defense industry, the Department of Defense, the federal government kind of find their way to solving this problem, which is not 10 years from now. In the industry, we think it's a now problem. And certainly the government needs to establish what they have, understand what's the most at risk, and start to get to a more quantum-resistant future.
Welcome back. The Defense Department's summer calendar includes several big deadlines. The Office of the Secretary of Defense owed the White House a major defense acquisition program review last Tuesday. An acquisition workforce reform plan is due August 7th. David Norquist is president and CEO of the National Defense Industrial Association. He's former Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller. David, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Francis.
Those two pieces that I referenced are out of an EO. There are other EOs. There's new legislation now that Congress has just passed. A lot going on that impacts the department. What are the biggest things that you think impact DoD and the defense industrial base right now?
So I think what you're seeing is two sets. One is the recent reconciliation legislation that passed, and the other is the series of reforms, both coming from the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee, as well as in the executive branch through these executive orders, all focused around the recognition that we have exited the post-Cold War era and we are back in a time of great power competition, and we don't have a defense industrial base designed for that.
Is it your sense that the EOs that are coming from the White House and the policy that the Armed Services Committees are making on the Hill sync with each other, or are they at odds with each other sometimes that could cause consternation inside the building?
So they're pursuing very similar ends. There are certain authorities that only Congress can have, certain ones that really are best handled inside the executive branch. And so there'll be certain places where the legislation bumps up against each other. They'll need to make sure they reconcile. But at the core, what each of them is aiming at is first speed. In the post-Cold War era, when there was the drawdown after the Soviet Union, speed was the thing you traded. You wanted exquisite systems, small quantities. But with China as a pacing challenge, speed now becomes one of the most important. There's a lot of new technologies entering, and there's a real push to do more through commercial processes, less of the bureaucratic red tape, and there are various reforms designed to speed that process up.
The term that you used, exquisite systems, I think is a very good one, because the department, even personnel, uniformed personnel especially inside the department, say we need to get out of the habit of asking for everything to be that fancy, that exquisite. And I wonder what that actually looks like from a requirements perspective now, whether your members are seeing the department putting its money and its requirements where its mouth is.
So what you're seeing first is, for the first time, a push on revising the requirements process. So 3 circles inside DoD: the budget process most people are familiar with, the acquisition that gets all the discussion. But the requirements process launches both of those, and for the first time you've seen, both on the Hill and the department, a real desire to completely overhaul how they do requirements. Part of that is when you take 10 to 15 years to field a plane, you put requirements in for which there is no solution. And the assumption is, well, sometime over the next 5 to 10 years we'll research a solution. If you want to have speed, then you really are looking to have systems fielded that solves today's problems with the technology you have. And that's part of speeding it up, is making sure the requirements are more responsive.
What would you like to see the department do, and what can your members and industry do on their side to drive that outcome so that 2, 3, 5 years from now, the system is moving the way that the department would like it to move today?
Right. So there's a couple of things. There's a series of rules that the department has, what type of data they're required to be provided, all of which add time to the process, the requirement process, some of the reporting requirements that slow it down. These are the ones that they're looking at, speeding it up, using a more commercial design. But the second one that's equally as important is the stability of the signal. If you want somebody to build a factory to produce new munitions, but in 2 years you change your mind on the munitions, they have to have recovered the cost of that factory. So they get very reluctant to make these investments if they think the demand signal is going to be very erratic. So I think that stability of saying, we're in it, we're buying it, we will continue to make those investments, that's what drives industry, and that's what brings the capital in for those major investments.
We have less than a minute left. Is that what the sea services have already seen with what's happening with shipbuilding capability writ larger for other types of weapon systems across the department, David?
So you've really seen the effect of the Cold War drawdown in ships and particularly submarines, where we laid off very large numbers of people. We went from building 3 submarines or 2 submarines a year down to every other year. And then you try to ramp back up and you realize there's hundreds of companies that are suppliers that don't exist. And trying to speed that up has been a major source of challenge, and part of what the investments are aimed at in reconciliation.
David, it's great to have you on the program.
Always
Thanks for
good to be
joining me
here.
again. Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. You can read more about acquisition reform and all the other topics that David and I talked about at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, an audit coming for auditors across the federal government. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. We'll be right back.
Innovation doesn't wait, and neither do we. At Maximus, we solve problems. Streamlining operations, delivering solutions at speed and scale that drive measurable results. From strategy to execution, we simplify complexity, building trust through expertise and innovative technology. Every service, every time. Efficient government delivered. We don't follow innovation. We drive it. Maximus.
You talked about the reactive to proactive shift that's possible. That's really been the golden ticket that people have been searching for in the cybersecurity realm for, I don't know, maybe since there's been a cybersecurity realm, right?
Right. So the key there is leveraging AI to find the vulnerability before it hits the enterprise, right? So I think the current state of affairs is trying to discover the vulnerability after it enters the enterprise as quickly as possible. Well, what if we could find the vulnerability before it hits? What if we could find where it was being sold in a dark web forum or where it was trending online, and we were able to inform the government agency that, in fact, they have a potential issue. Now, these government agencies, which again are resource bound, can prioritize their activity and put the defenses in place to prevent the attack from happening in the first place.
Welcome back. An extreme makeover's coming for the federal government's financial management. The director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russ Vought, calls federal audits, quote, rote exercises that do not ensure sound financial management. Lauren DeJonge Schulman is founder and principal at Telos Lab. Robert Shea is chief executive officer of Gov Navigators. They're both former associate directors for performance and personnel management at the Office of Management and Budget. Welcome, friends, to the, I didn't get the mint green email, unfortunately, to be able to match with you guys, so I apologize for that in advance. But the audit issue that Russ Vought brings up at the Office of Management and Budget, Robert, what is he speaking to about what he sees at the agencies across government and not just what he sees at OMB?
So, yeah, you didn't use the title of the memo, which was, I think, federal audits don't work. Agencies have been undergoing financial statement audits since the 1990 Chief Financial Officers Act. We still don't have all of them getting clean audit opinions. Those that do, I'm not sure see pure value in the exercise. And the amount we're investing at DoD, I'm not sure people think is focused on the right things. So all of that, plus the fact that CFO shops across government have increasingly fewer resources than they have in the past, mean it might be the right time to take a fresh look at what we're auditing, how we're auditing, what value we're getting from auditing.
Lauren, Robert, and you and I and others have spoken on a number of occasions about the importance of financial management data to making decisions at the OMB level and at the agency level. What information would somebody like Russ Vought or others at OMB need that they're not getting now from the audit community to help in that process?
That's a great question. I think it's as much about the information that he wants to get and also about are agencies and OMB able to take that and take action based on what they're hearing from agencies? Are they able to use that information and use it to address key risks, key examples of waste and fraud? Are they able to find some of the root causes behind some of the issues behind all of this? The information may be there buried within the mountains it is provided, but it's much more about how is it integrated? Is it actionable? Are people paying attention to this? Or is it just a box that folks can check? So I think the impetus that he's saying here makes a lot of sense. Let's make these valuable. It's more, does he have a change management strategy so it's actually going to be followed?
What's the change management strategy that works both from an FM perspective and from a management perspective, like the seat that you sat in?
Well, for one, I think that what it is not is what ostensibly happened, which is just sending out the memo and saying, hey guys, we're going to change this and we're going to update the circular. Part of it's going to have to involve listening to the community that both implements the audits but also is the customers of it to understand how can we do this in a way that lives up to these standards. But then also, how do we bring this into training and practice so it's both intelligible and integrated into other processes, which is another element they mentioned around having audits be in part of performance management, better around strategy decisions, budgeting decisions, so people are using this information in an actionable way.
Mm-hmm. Robert, who should all the stakeholders be that should be involved in those discussions that Lauren just talked about?
Well, we don't have time. But Lauren's point about needing a change management strategy to make sure that where we land is the most useful place. The real risk is that not having collaborated with GAO or the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board in this new approach means that current audits aren't going to be in compliance with the rules as they stand today, which will lead to enormous confusion. But if we do get together, GAO, OMB, Treasury, OPM, they make up the Joint Financial Management Improvement Program, Congress, the agency CFOs, the CFO Council, the Inspectors General, you see why this is an enormous ecosystem. We've made a lot of investment. Getting that community together to figure out what processes can we put in place to make sure audits produce actionable information in a way that can be integrated, as Lauren said, into the way we're making decisions. Because you've got GAO saying we've got upwards of $500 billion annually in fraud. Though that's not adequately reflected in the financial statements, even though in a standalone way, they are an incredibly rich source of information. Getting that really integrated into a decision-making process is sort of the holy grail.
So to Russ Vought's point that he wrote in the memo that you alluded to, federal audits don't work. What do they look like? How do they work in an environment 2 years from now or 5 years, some future date, where someone can say they do work, they do what you both have described that they should do to enable people to use them effectively to make decisions, Robert?
I think the process of producing financial statements in a more regular way, in a more timely way, that can be used in the budget process, say, or to respond to emerging risks like fraud. I think it's a much more nimble, less cookie cutter approach.
One last audience I'll mention here that we haven't talked about is the American people are interested in this information too. They have told us that they worry about waste and fraud being part of the federal budget process. I don't think a lot of that comes down to what is shared with them and is shared with them in an intelligible and understandable way. This may not be the priority goal that they have coming out of this, but one thing they could think about is how do you communicate this not only to the agency audiences and OMB and Congress, but to the American people who are the key consumers of the information.
And we're not starting out fresh. I mean, these are things that people have been thinking about for a long time. We do have a real opportunity with this sort of, broken glass to really rethink what we can do differently.
You both have tremendous experience formulating and connecting policy to and then executing, implementing President's management agendas. How would one go about taking that issue of the financial data, realigning it, reinvigorating it, and so on, as we've discussed, and connecting it to something in a PMA that we expect the administration to come out with, I would think, any day now?
I think there's a few strategies you could use. One is starting with thinking about your customers and going to them and say, well, out of the reams of information that are produced here, what's most useful to you? What would you do with this information? When is it most useful to you? And how do you start that process? Starting it from a customer lens is a great perspective. And then following up with other conversations about, well, how hard is it to actually generate that? And aligning the impact versus difficulty. See, how do we actually generate a strategy and approach that isn't going to become more expensive and time consuming while driving better value for Americans?
Robert?
I know this won't surprise you, but I think getting an enterprise view of what programs are most cost effective, because an economic development program at Commerce that seems to be producing good results, while nonetheless continuing to invest in HUD programs that may not work, doesn't make sense. Getting this enterprise view of what are the most cost effective ways to achieve mission, I think would be a great result.
All right, we just have a couple of minutes left. You mentioned HUD. HUD is moving, we learned recently.
To Alexandria.
To Alexandria, your hometown. What are the challenges and risks involved with an agency moving its physical location while it still has to deliver for the American people? Lauren, you first.
Typically, these sorts of moves take a long time to plan, long time to execute, and happen over a period of months, if not longer. And the planning for it takes longer than that. This felt much more abrupt, and I think that we're going to see the results of that as people realize there's not physical space for people to be doing a job in the locations that they're meant to be at. Hopefully, they're able to reset and move the HUD employees to a place where they're able to execute on mission and reassure the NSF employees about where it is they're going to go and that they are valuable to the work and valuable not only in the work that they do, but on the place that they do it in.
Yeah, that was the thing that came out of this that struck me is the mayor of Alexandria said, we love our NSF people and we want to make sure we try to keep them there, Robert.
The more the merrier
Yeah.
in Alexandria. I should maybe second guess that answer because of the traffic.
Because we'll all come.
That's right. But I do think, federal agency moves are not new, but they've been done on a much smaller scale in the past. So much going on with the federal workforce, but you've also got technology. You've got people who've been going to the same office for many years having to disrupt their whole approach to getting to work. These are the kinds of things that are going to be very difficult to manage, especially on the scale that we're talking about in this administration.
Robert, Lauren, it's great to have you back as always. Thanks for joining me today. You can read more about all the things we talked about on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today with Francis Rose. We'll be right back. What are the best ways for agencies to track that, to know when it's time to maybe do a reset like you just described?
Yeah, so usually using automated tools and ironically using AI, right? So, it's implementing AI and also using AI to monitor the performance of the model. I'm actually doing a project currently helping a company use agentic AI. So they're using these software agents running in the background to actually measure and monitor the accuracy that the model's output.
What are the things that organizations in government can do to try to stay ahead of that trajectory? Or is the volume just too much that that's not even a realistic possibility?
Well, it's, there's the classic example of the OODA loop, which a lot of people in security use. It was originally like a fighter pilot term, right? And so it's constant, right? It's cyber warfare. So you have to continue to try and stay inside of the enemy's OODA loop, and it's never ending, right? It's not one thing that they can do. They need to constantly have the most reliable, up-to-date, actionable data, training, and appropriate disposition of the cyber force.
FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. The Chief Information Officer of the Army, Leonel Garciga, will be here. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching and have a great week.